All right. So, once again, we're here with another episode of Phishing for Answers. Today, I've got Dr. Joshua Scarpino. I didn't ask, do you prefer Josh or Joshua?
Josh is fine.
Okay, I go by Joshua, so I just assumed, but I probably shouldn't have. So, well, hey, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so currently I'm the CISO VP of Information Security at TrustEngine. I'm responsible for our security and compliance programs and also our IT operations function at the organization. In addition to that, I'm also CEO of a company that I founded, Assess Intelligence, which is really around deploying responsible technology. So that includes both security and the AI side of things. So I'm heavily involved in the AI landscape as well because I believe that without responsible technology, where are we going in the future, right? It's important to understand that.
Well, I
Aside from
think
that,
Oh,
go ahead.
go ahead. I was just going to throw in. I think AI is becoming a core part of cybersecurity that I plan on talking about later today. Anyway, but continue.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Aside from that, I mentor. I am also a professor at a local community college where I first started my education journey years ago, and then I try to stay involved in a lot of different research initiatives around responsible AI.
All right, that's very cool. Responsible AI is such a big thing. In fact, I find AI as an intriguing conversation when it comes to cybersecurity in general. So maybe we just jump right over there. Did I not bring? Yeah, I did. I brought my slide. Okay, let's jump over to delay 1 hour. Sorry, my our patch management solution was just threatening to reboot my computer on me. Um, Fortunately, it's letting me delay at least once. So yeah, we almost had a slight technical difficulty here. But no, so AI is really a massive concern, at least in my opinion, when it comes to security awareness. There's a lot of different aspects of it. You've got everything from deep fakes. Last week, I got an opportunity to talk to a CISO that of a bank, and their CEO had been impersonated already. So we've got that, but then we've also got just the data protection side of it. And I think there's the, response when it comes to responsible AI, there's even a lot more. We've got, how do we make sure that biases aren't involved in decision making? How do we make sure that it's fair and it's honest? And I'm sure you're thinking about even more. So let me just turn it over. What are some of the things that you're thinking about when it comes to AI?
Yeah, so I'd say security and compliance and responsible AI kind of go hand in hand, right? Because one of the core components of that is really understanding the risk of your environment and the systems and where you are managing data. And to me, I'm heavily focused in the NIST AI RMF, understanding that and having organizations adopt frameworks like this. We actually wrote a maturity model that was published in conjunction with IEEE and stuff as a result of that. And one of the things that's critical for organizations to really take inventory of what risks they have, right? And this applies to whether it's security education or phishing or AI in general, deployment of any new technology. We really need to foundationally understand the risks of that technology, and that way we can appropriately develop and deploy a technology that makes sense for the organization and for the people that it's having an impact on. So I
Yeah.
think, to me, really having a robust risk management process that doesn't include just security, but includes all enterprise risk is critical. In fact, there was a article that came out a few weeks ago. It was from ISACA, and I was writing a presentation that I'm doing, and in the headline it said, uh, "All risk is enterprise risk," and I was like, "Oh, this is going to be great," because they're talking about risk and I'm talking about AI. So they're going to have something on there in AI, right? Well, I literally went through the whole magazine. There was a call out page about how you need to understand the risk with AI, but it was more of an advertisement. There was no journal article around addressing enterprise risk from the AI perspective. So I'm using that in one of my presentations is like, we keep saying that it's important to understand these foundational risks, but we're not making it a foundational part of the programs that we have in place.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think AI impacts our cybersecurity in so many different ways. It's insane. I mean, everywhere from the approach to how we're going to detect and mitigate threats
Yeah.
over to the attacks that are coming in. I've already observed AI driven attacks. Let me ask you, have you seen any sort of AI driven attacks in the wild?
So we've seen some from a phishing standpoint, which is one of the topics of this. We've seen some, but our organization is actually very mature when it comes to detecting and identifying these things. I'm lucky. I'm blessed to have an organization that is responsible. It is and react and responsive to like identifying these threats. I've been in previous organizations where that was not the case, and you have to literally pound it into people like this is a phishing email. You don't just blatantly click on things that just because it's in your inbox. Actually, I have a polo actually listed, but it says "Stop clicking on shit." Like, not, but
No,
I
it's okay. This is not a PG, podcast,
yes.
so,
So
any
my previous
language is
organization,
completely acceptable.
yes, we I got that as a gift actually from one of the people at the organization I work at because
I love it.
it's something that is consistent and there's usually going to be at least one person that just will not take the time because they're in such a rush or too focused on their job. So I think that yes, there is an onset because it's removed spelling errors and grammatical errors that were persistent across like the threat surface, but it's evolved to where now we have to be very proactive in identifying the threats. I actually sat on a committee for research where somebody was developing a phishing machine learning language that would develop a phishing module, and then they would in turn use that to retrain it to identify phishing training that was developed by AI. And it was like this circular process to help catch when you have these iterative machine learning based content that's being generated. So it was actually a really fascinating research project that was completed.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it. Maybe you can link me to that a little bit later. Um, so I know we've also seen those ones that really appear to be mining social media, and while they're maybe not super advanced, they're smart enough to know who works for what department inside my company and at least have a little bit of hierarchy. Have you seen any of those sorts of phishing attacks, or no, not really yet?
Yes, that and also smishing, right? People are using direct communication, and the problem is with the onset of breaches and with people publicly putting out their professional profiles in general, right? It's not
Yeah,
difficult or a far reach for people to say, "I know where this person works and what they do at the organization." So it
yeah,
shouldn't come as a surprise. The biggest thing for organizations is to really understand what is our risk landscape, right? Are these people being targeted? And if they are, let's get them the right education to make sure that they understand the risk that they're being targeted with. I get routinely messages from people across the organization saying, I'm getting direct text communications from the CEO or from the CRO, right? And it's like, these things are hard to stop because somewhere your telephone number got leaked and it's associated with your name, and then they look you up on LinkedIn and say, hey, you're affiliated with this organization, and I think that I could probably get one over on you. It's especially prevalent for people and new roles, especially in an
yeah.
organization.
So I've been advocating for a while that we should have a social media waiver that all new employees sign that basically just says, hey, listen, the second you tie yourself to our organization online, you're going to be targeted. And just a little acknowledgement that says that they understand they're going to be targeted, because making them stop to acknowledge that, I think, is very valuable, because like you said, it's every or pretty much every employee that links themselves to the company, they're gonna get targeted.
Yep. Not only that, companies go out of their way to highlight when new people join the organization, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. It's good to announce and say, "Hey, we have these great new people coming on board." But we also have to be understand what risk that brings into the organization. We have to be prepared to address it. I think one of the
Yeah,
things that is critical that a lot of organizations miss is getting up in front of this with training and the proper education, because when people start, they're bombarded with all this new stuff, but it's important to make that training set concise to the risks that are going to be relevant to them at the beginning of their career, not over the next year, right? So we want to
yeah.
make sure that we tailor the program to address current risks, not just every risk. So
I like it. Hey, you're preaching my language there. Um, it's Security Awareness Month. So, are you doing anything extra to sort of celebrate Security Awareness Month?
So I've been at organizations across both sides. We've had organizations. I worked at Fortune 500, and they've actually went out of their way to have Security Education Week and do hands-on training. But now I'm fortunate and disfortunate to work in a remote organization. So from the fortunate side, I love being able to work from home and remote most of the time, except for travel to offsites. But the unfortunate side is we don't get that personal interaction, so we have to be creative. Our organization has actually taken the approach of doing ongoing iterative bite-sized training throughout the year, because security, I understand the importance of security education awareness, and highlighting that in October. But it's also important that we ensure that the threats that people are being faced with, that we have relevant training to those, so that we constantly involve it. So we have a cadence of across each quarter, we do bite-sized training. We have some common topics, and then we also focus on specific topics that where we're seeing increased in threats in the organization. In addition to that, we have ongoing monthly security phishing training, which is focused on addressing their level of expertise in identifying these and raising the complexity of the training to ensure that they're getting threats that are relevant and not something that they can just dismiss and say, "Oh, I've seen this one. It's not a big deal," right? That's important to have varied and training that's relevant.
I love it, and I really do think that that continuous bite size that you mentioned is so critical. There's this behavioral science principle called spaced learning theory that talks about how if you break things up into little bite-sized chunks and you feed it to people at a high frequency, that you get really good retention. I imagine that since you moved to this model, how long have you been on that model?
So my previous two organizations, I've actually taken this approach. I was at a HR tech company before, now being at a fintech. People are a lot more willing to participate when they're not being consumed for 2 hours, right? We
Yeah, I'll bet.
have between 15 and 25-minute trainings each quarter, and then we do an annual one, which is a little bit longer, usually about 30 to 45 minutes. And those are it's been that way. I've been doing it for about 4 years now, and I have really good engagement. We always get good feedback, and we try to pick things that are varied. So the training's not just somebody sitting down at a PowerPoint, right? We have some that are interactive modules. We have game modules. We have leverage some of the video modules where it's a scenario, something that happened, just to kind of get people to think differently. So we like to vary the training to ensure that people remain engaged, and it's not the same thing every year where you're like, "Oh, I did this security training last year." I was in the government for 16 years, and it's every year it's the same exact training for the most part for like a 5 or 6 year stretch. Then they change it up, and then you get used to it again. You're like, it just clicked through, right?
Even then, it really doesn't change much because you're still helping Alice pick a password, or Bob avoid clicking on a fish, or whatever it happens to be. I also spent my time working for the government and doing that security awareness training. And even myself, I found myself not listening to anything, guessing at the answers that I didn't know, because there'd be some like about laws that maybe I needed to pay attention to that training to know what it was. And so, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. It didn't do anything to drive engagement with those of us that should care the most. So how is it going to get those people that care the least about it? I-
Exactly. You said you did government. Were you in? Did you do any of the Air Force training? The what do they call it? This guy. Actually, here I have something to show. I got another item to show, so I don't know if you can see this, but I'm sure anybody that's in the
Yeah.
military or government remembers this image. Is the common cat card that's relevant. Sweater vest Jeff is what they called him. So
Yep. Uh, so I was actually at the SEC as well as the FDIC. So don't think it's the exact same training, but from what I've talked with all of my friends that did work for some of these different agencies, pretty much everyone has the same training.
yep,
It's almost identical across all the different government organizations. The difference is what laws they're teaching you, is my experience there. So,
exactly.
um, okay, so what are you doing anything around gamification? So it sounds like you've got a pretty robust cybersecurity awareness program, I would imagine you've added some level or some element of gamification.
Yeah, so it has to be tailored to the organization, right? So we have people that love gamification. Then we have senior leaders who think it's a waste of time and childish. So you have to have a little bit of balance. So we do mix it up. Some of the rotating modules we try to mix a game in every now and then, but we try to create a balance of the different pieces because it depends on the individual. Like when you get into engineers, especially during the career stuff, they love that stuff because it's quick and it just kind of semi engaging.
Yeah,
But people that are more tenured and more focused on driving, business results and stuff like that,
they
they
don't
think
have
it's a
time
waste of
for that.
time and they don't really understand or connect with it. So you have to really understand the audience in your organization, solicit feedback, and ensure that if you have people that are doing that in your organization, maybe that's the culture of the organization, then you should increase it. I think one of the things that commonly does not happen though is soliciting feedback, right? In the government organizations I've been in, a couple of big organizations I've been in, the feedback happens like point in time, but it's not part of every single module. And I know our LMS, we leverage feedback from every single training so that we can understand which ones did people enjoy, what should we do more of, what should we do less of. And I think that's critical to ensure that you have people that are engaged. Another thing that's important is ensuring that you have something that's relevant for people. A lot of times, organizations focus on addressing only the risks present in the organization, what the organization's facing. We also do biweekly newsletters, and like this perfect time of the year, we started getting into the holidays. Right, there's a lot of fraud that happens. People going away on trips and vacation during the summers, or even at Christmas time, and you want to highlight security risks that are relevant to them to get them in that security mindset to ensure that they're not only practicing it at work, but they're practicing it at home. Because the more they practice it at home, the more they're going to practice it at work.
Well, and that's a really good point that comes up so often on this show is that we have to connect it to their home life, their personal life, because when we do, it makes them care more. And like you said, when they practice that at home, they bring that into the workplace. You said it way better than I did. But yeah, I couldn't agree more. Um, I have a feeling that I know which direction you're going to go on this, but I do have to ask, carrot or stick? Now, I know it's not quite so simple, but say you had to pick one and throw the other one away. Which one do you go with?
I'd say it's not quite that simple, but the reality is I tend to go with the carrot just based on the way that I've answered. Obviously, that's the best approach. However, there is a point at which the stick is required, right? Because for compliance purposes, we have to ensure that organizations, that everybody's completing their training in a timely manner and that they are actually completing the required training throughout the year, right? So for phishing, this isn't as big of a deal. You have to do some remediation training sometimes for people that are habitual, but it's more relevant for the required training modules around protecting data and how the company uses data or policy changes. Sometimes when people don't make the time to do it, you have to make them make the time,
Yeah.
and that's just the reality of the business. So if I had to throw one away, I would say it would be the stick and get better at carrots, having carrots or offering carrots. But the reality is, I think both are necessary, but I would weigh on the side of using a carrot and always encouraging people to want to do it than forcing. Because when you force people, they don't grasp the concepts.
I agree, and I mean I'm just a big fan of the carrot over the stick in general, but I do think you're right. There's absolutely a place for that stick, but I think when you lead with a carrot approach, your stick is a lot kinder too. Like your stick is, hey, your account's disabled until you do your training, versus going straight to, hey, you idiot, you're fired. And I've seen a lot of cultures that really do lean toward that. In fact, on Friday, I did a podcast where we got to this, and the person goes, "Oh, 100% stick." And it ended up being the entire podcast. We spent, I think, like 35 minutes talking about carrot versus stick and really, really getting deep on that. So I mean, I definitely see the need from time to time, but to me, we got to make people want to care. And I would rather that the cybersecurity department wasn't looked at as like that evil department that's always getting in everyone's way. When we're, the friendly department that, is just here to keep everyone safe, I think that's just a better a better relationship that we have with the user. And I feel like it builds more bridges versus the more stick approach builds barriers. And they may do it because they're forced to, but I don't think their heart's in it.
Yeah, you actually highlighted something that's a core component of how I operate my security programs. And I've had executives before tell me, "Hey, I really appreciate the fact that you take this approach." But you made a comment around the carrot allows you to partner with people in the organization, right? And I think a lot of people say that security hinders the organization, right? That's a common misconception across the industry is security is going to put up a roadblock or stop us or stop business from advancing because of whatever reason. And I think it's important to really understand the risks to the business so that you can have a balanced approach to driving the business forward. Because short of being a public organization, right, we have to ensure that the company is profitable so that everybody has a job. One. The other thing is it's a lot easier to partner with people and have mutual benefit to the organization than it is to say no and force people to do things and then it benefits no one. I think it's important that to build relationships in a security program and drive value through bridging those relationships across the organization and partnering with key leaders across the organization. And I think should be a foundation requirement for anybody that's running a security program. And a lot of times that's often overlooked as I'm security and this is what I say and this is the way it's going to go. And I think that does a disservice to the organization and really achieving organizational objectives.
I think too often as well, people in cybersecurity maybe don't have those softer skills. And another theme that comes up from a lot of the leaders that I interview here is how important that business mindset is. Understanding how important the bottom line is, driving revenue, making sure that we're profitable so that everyone's jobs are secure. And so I do think that understanding how businesses work and how we should be an enabler, not the one that's always getting in the way. So couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I actually took a small stint in my career and went to be an internal auditor at a large insurance company. And it was probably one of the best decisions I ever made because I did a lot of operational audits, right? And it forced me to realize that there's a much bigger world than security. Like
Yeah,
in security, leading security, you get very tunnel vision, and
you do.
that opportunity forced me to address what are the operational impacts of everything we do, and not just in the security realm, across the whole business.
Yeah.
So
Well, for me, it was, first I was an ethical hacker and I was very rigid, the stereotypical red teamer, that approach to cybersecurity. And then as I became a CISO, I learned to balance it a little bit more. But it was really when after I founded this company and I became a CEO that I truly learned to balance that, and I find that invaluable. And I think that we've got to do more teaching of business inside of some of these like conferences. You don't see the business track often.
yeah.
It's all about AI or risk or cybersecurity, but not often are we talking about the business side. And I, for one, would love to see Black Hat have that, that business track that, or RSA. So okay, so another area that I like to hit on is how can we make it more fun for users? Now, I know cybersecurity is not sexy, it's boring, it's not clicking on a link. And in fact, when we do everything right, nothing happens, right? So there's no big, bang at the end if you will. Well, there is if we don't do well. Do you have any tips to make it more fun?
So I'm going to circle back to what I said before, right? I think it's difficult to tailor to everybody in an organization because some people are going to, one person's going to think something fun, the other person's going to think it's a waste of their time. I think it's important to get feedback and ensure that you're tailoring your program to your people and the culture of your organization. But I think the most valuable thing, aside from making it fun, is making it relevant. And this goes back to what I was telling you, like the security. We send out biweekly security newsletters. We have stuff that's focused on that personally impact people. And regardless of it being fun, if it's relevant to them, like scams at the holidays or whatever it is, or election fraud, right? Things that people are actually going to semi connect with, then they have the opportunity to apply to their personal life, and it's something that they can take with them, and it's not only a point in time useful for the organization that they work at. And I think that that is what makes it fun.
So I will. I do think you're right. This shouldn't say fun. I think entertaining would be a better word because when you do connect it to how it helps them in their personal life, it becomes very engaging, very entertaining, very quickly. Um, I will say the more we can make it fun, like I've heard of cyber escape rooms. I don't know how,
Mhm.
what I think about those, but during a month like Security Awareness Month, I think absolutely. But I think the more that we can make it engaging or entertaining, the more effective it becomes. But I do agree with you about, we don't want to become patronizing. You don't want to go focus so much on making it fun that it's just, almost childish or whatever. There has to be there's a very fine line there because we don't want to waste the user's time because it's their time is very valuable and we have to be respectful of it. Okay, so let me see. We've talked through a couple things. Um, do you want to play a game here? And it's an easy game, and all you have to do is spot or tell me whether or not this image is created by AI or if it's stock photography.
I should get my wife in here. She's an art director and does this stuff really. So,
Okay.
stock photography or AI? I am gonna say, hold on, let me make the screen bigger because I'm doing myself a disservice by having a small screen. I'm gonna say this is stock.
That is actually AI. And it's really put in here specifically to trick you because
Look a
everyone
lot.
thinks the misconception is that it can't do hands well, which they've gotten better.
Yeah, I know. It's difficult. The thumb looks a little weird on that one.
Yeah, it's when you pay attention.
See, see, this stuff is so difficult anymore. I would say that this is stock.
It is once again AI. They were both AI. It was rigged to begin with.
I figured it probably was, but art is not my thing. My wife is an art director, and she's always like, "Oh, that's AI." She's like constantly.
Wasn't last year, I think it was, there was this big art contest, and I don't remember which one it was, but somebody submitted something that an AI had created, and it won. And there was just this big uproar. A lot of people were upset because you weren't supposed to submit AI,
Yeah.
but they were trying to make a point about just how far AI had come. Um,
Yep.
Speaking of AI, going back to the AI topic, um, they predict that we're going to be able to, go to Netflix a couple years from now, let's say, and say, "Hey, I want to watch a movie with Ryan Reynolds and this," and it'll just make that movie on the fly. What do you think about that?
That's a fascinating concept, right? It seems so far fetched. If you from the era we grew up in, it seems so far fetched with the onset of technology, how fast is rapidly growing. I think that the challenge is it's really not that far fetched anymore. I mean, if you
It's
look at
not.
technology doubles every 18 months, and we look at back when I started my research project for my PhD, it was actually we were just getting to the point where OpenAI became like commonplace, right? I mean, AI has been around since 1956 when the
Yeah,
term was
and
coined.
it was going to take over the world since
Yeah,
then.
exactly. That's exactly my point. And you look at over like a 50-year span, there really wasn't a huge level of innovation. But in the last 5 years
Yeah.
alone, it's just been crazy. And organizations, and I think for security and compliance professionals, the biggest thing is like the rapidly expanding risk landscape. We're like trying to keep control of like how are people using it or using it right, what data is going into it.
Yeah.
And I 100% believe that, yeah, people can do movies on demand. They'll probably be short films at first, but at some point in the future, it's practical as long as you're kicking back royalty to them and the
Yeah.
artist says, yeah, that's okay. And there's proper controls. I guess that's something feasible, but there's risk with anything, right? So
Yeah. No, I mean it's an interesting, sort of thought around how are things going to work as AI, moves in. Will we even have, a keyboard and mouse? Do we need it anymore? Do we just talk to the machines from now on? I mean, uh I don't know. Have you thought about any of this? How does it change our lives on a day to day? It's not
so I,
cybersecurity related, but it's interesting.
yeah, it's interesting. So I have not specifically thought about the nuanced change in an individual's life, right? My focus is primarily around AI for good, AI controls, and understanding how we're using AI, right? So I tend to steer away from technologies or people from technologies that they really don't understand how or why it's working. It's just working, right? And that's where I draw concern and raise pause and say, hey, let's really think about this. I think that with the appropriate understanding of the context of the system and the inputs and outputs and how it's being used and the people it's being used against, we can make educated decisions on this is what we should or shouldn't do.
Yeah.
There was a research, and part of my research, one of the things that was interesting is I had a person I interviewed. He was in AI for over like 40 years in one of these big tech companies. And he said that the problem is whose morality. It's the same thing as whose definition of bias. If you're in Tehran, you're going to have a completely different notion of what morality is than Salt Lake City, Utah,
Yeah.
or Angkor. So he said there's a lot of different shades of morality, and I'm paraphrasing that, but it brought up something that's very fascinating, right? A lot of times we don't understand that, like we live in our own bubble, and we don't understand that when technology is developed, that our view of how things should be is not really necessarily what's appropriate for somebody else in a different culture or a different environment. And we really have to have multi-stakeholder feedback as part of that process to understand, like, if we're developing this technology, that's great, but is it right for everyone or the people it's being used against? And I think that's one of the pieces that I kind of focus on when we start talking about, well, should we or will we you have technology that does X, right? It's like, is it right for the people that it's being used against? Whether it's financial sector or it's HR sector, right? It's not right for everybody, and there has to be gated checkpoints in there that we can validate and make sure that if it's not right, let's rewind and have the appropriate conversations and decision points so that we can circumvent those processes.
Yeah, I think privacy is going to be a really key area around AI. And we already see it with like the new Windows features that are coming out where it remembers everything, every website I've been to, every document I've opened, every word I've typed. At what point are we feeding too much data into the cloud? And I mean, it's only gone or continue to escalate and go more and more. And as internet connections become better and faster, and all of our devices become better and faster. Well, what did the developers want to do? They want to, send more information up to the cloud. But I do think that we've got to think about privacy a lot more, particularly those of us in the U.S. Around the world, I think they're doing a better job of that often than we are here in the states. Now, maybe not as a whole. You've got California and Colorado doing okay, but I do think just our country in general needs to take privacy a lot more seriously, particularly with AI changing everything so quickly.
Yeah, I think this also circles back to what we talked about at the beginning, right? So it's really understanding the risk of the systems that we're deploying, right? Having those foundational processes and having AI included as part of those processes. A lot of organizations will say that we have these processes and we're deploying these new technologies, but they don't include it in the routine foundational programs that they have around risk management and understanding the risk. They don't have the right people, like a diverse team of people that are providing inputs to, hey, should we use this system in X way? This is what we're intending to use. And then last, they don't say, here's how the system was designed and supposed to be used and deployed. And then they circle back at the end and go, well, we changed some stuff and now it's doing all this other stuff too, right? And it's like, well, did we do the right risk assessments to make sure that that didn't involve the scope of the system and the impact on people?
Yeah.
It's
I
fine
mean, it
when it's
all
a
starts with secure design, and you're right.
yep,
So often we don't even look at it, and it's changed so much from the time we did look at it that it's not even applicable anymore.
yep.
Okay, so we've talked through quite a bit here. Um, what KPIs are you focused on most when it comes to the human element?
When it comes to security education, the thing I focus on primarily is around completion of the training modules that we assign. I focus on fishbone percentage across the organization, right? And I like to understand what are they, what is causing the increase if there's increases, and the types of training materials that we'll be sending out as part of the phishing campaigns, so that if there is a specific type of campaign element around, whatever it is, certain vendors or whatever, we can ensure that we provide remedial follow-up in-person module-based training to support those outcomes and drive that number back down. Typically, as an organization, this is actually the only organization I've ever been at where I've had consecutive months where we've had zero, like fish people clicking in, and we've had a significant high portion of people reporting. But people get busy, right? And they do things without thinking. So every now and then we'll get, the numbers will creep up a tiny bit, but it's usually remediated pretty quickly. And we have training that provides immediate feedback on the type of phishing materials they're getting, which is very beneficial because people go, "Oh, I see what I missed now," right? So you
Yeah.
do that enough, eventually people get used to it. And we've been into it about 2 years now in this new program, and it's been phenomenal. And I can't praise my company enough because they're incredible. They've done excellent work. So,
Well,
but
I
yeah,
think
those
that
are the
goes
things.
that goes to a testament to your methodology that you are at 0. It's there's so many that couldn't even dream of ever getting to 0. And so I know the few companies that are able to get there, it's because they're building a strong culture. I would imagine, based on some of what you've told me, you probably have a really good top-down leadership at your company.
We do. Our leadership team is very focused on understanding security risks in the organization and compliance requirements, and they are really supportive of me in the program. And that's actually probably one of the other comments I'd make is senior leadership drives everything, right? If it's dismissed at the executive level across the organization, nobody else is going to put the effort into it. But since I've been here, the leadership team has always been extremely supportive of our program and our outcomes, and connecting that to driving real value for our business goals. And we do that across with our customers. We do that with, how we do business, and then how we go to market. And I think it shows foundational commitment to the rest of the organization from the leadership team, and it shows that we're committed to advancing our controls and maintaining a high level of confidence in what we do as a business.
I like it. So I find that most
Mhm.
people who have been in cybersecurity for any period of time have developed a couple pet peeves. Do you have any pet peeves I can get you to talk about today?
I'd say one of the most common ones is when people get in a rush and they circumvent things because it's easier. And a lot of this goes back to access management stuff, right? Because for us, it's any industry really, first thing that auditors always look at is access, right? And it's the
Yeah,
easiest thing to do, right? It really is. But when people are like, well, we'll just circumvent this control because I only need this real quick, it'll be easy.
yeah,
But then it goes up on a report of, hey, we didn't have a ticket for this, or we didn't follow proper procedures for this. Because somebody with an admin access did something. And that's been prevalent in pretty much every organization I've been in. I've argued in previous companies, I've argued with Linux admins about, well, I want sudo attached to my primary user account. You're like, you don't need it attached to your primary user. You should use your admin user.
yes.
So access management's always been a pet peeve of mine, and following and ensuring compliance with foundational processes. That's the biggest thing. Everything else, people make mistakes. We're all human, right? And
Mhm.
the biggest way to combat those challenges is through education. I think that often security education is an underrated aspect of security programs, and it doesn't get the focus it should, and they're not relevant. They just pump them out, and it's a checkbox compliance. And I think that does a disservice to the organization as
Now,
a whole.
are you doing any role-based training currently?
So we do, yes, yes. We have training specifically for people that handle customer data, and then we also have developer training that's specific to the types of development we do.
Okay.
So we believe that's important. We do, and those are annual because it's added on top of the other training that we have. So we have annual specific training that comes out. Actually, just came out end of September for our developer engineer organization. But yeah, we have modules that we deploy to them, and that's an additional about 30 to 45 minutes of training specifically targeted around code development and security training.
Okay. Very interesting. Our one of my VPs often quotes a statistic that uh, people are or training becomes 15 times more effective when it's contextual to the person's role in the organization, because all of a sudden it's not that one size fits all. They feel like it, it matters. um,
Yep.
so very cool to see you doing the role based training. um, any general advice that you would give to somebody that's building out their first security awareness program?
Two things. I would say that it's critical to make the training relevant. We've talked about that over and over throughout this whole thing.
It's a
It
good
will never
theme.
be successful if people do not find it relevant. To your point, developer training, right? They have to have context and understand this applies directly to me. So when you have high risk areas or systems or people, make the content relevant to them and their role. And then I'd say the other thing is security program in general, and this is across any organization, I don't care where you are. Your job is not to be a hindrance to the organization. Your job is to empower the organization. And if you empower the organization, you're going to have more support behind your program. So build relationships cross functionally. My information security oversight committee has executive leaders across the org. And I think that that's critical. And they're part of the understanding the risks within an organization. They make decision on any risks that exceed critical thresholds, but they also are foundational to understanding what are we doing in the organization and improving all governance annually. It makes them vested in the process. Don't build security in a silo. It doesn't benefit anybody but your team. And then you're
I
going to say, I can't get anybody to do anything. Well, if you don't have anybody else included in the process, they're not going to want to do anything. So it's important to make sure that people across the org and executive leaders, including sales and HR and finance, are on those teams making those decisions. If the leadership's helping make the decisions, they're going to help enforce it and drive it forward. And it's going to be successful.
Another point that I'll make there is that when you build relationships with the different teams, you learn about the threats that they face in their job that you might not know about otherwise.
Yeah.
I talk to people all the time that say, yeah, it was when I went out and actually started meeting with people that I really started understanding our risk. I thought I knew about it before, but I learned about so much more, so many things that we were unaware of when I met with people and started talking and having those
Yeah.
conversations.
You said something that made me think. So we in my organizations, we have built a tiered risk assessment process. It's something that we've done that's unique. And I got the idea from when I was actually in audit. We did risk assessments for
Yeah.
evaluating audit goals for the organization and developing an audit plan. And one of the things we did is we tailored the program so that every department has a biannual or semi-annual audit risk review with each department head. They get solicit feedback from their team, and then they fill out their own risk spreadsheets, and then that all goes back, and we have an organizational risk review process that occurs biweekly. So as those get populated, we find risks that are identified across the org, and then we are able to correlate those and say, hey, there's risk over here and risk over here. This is a larger risk. It's impacting multiple areas in the business. And we use that to inform our security and compliance program. And then if the risk exceeds certain thresholds, it goes to the ISOC team, which I mentioned earlier. And we say, hey, we got this really big problem. And all the executives are in there and they're hearing it. So they've got to either accept it or make a decision to remediate. And that's something that has allowed me to prioritize things. Identity access management for our platforms was one of them. One of the huge risks that we identified in the org.
Yeah.
We started raising the concerns. There was a lot of little concerns. blowing it up, and then we ended up buying a third-party IDP and implementing that into our solution. And now we have very robust processes around identity management for our platform. So it's really valuable, and it helps. You can't do things in a silo. This is what I mentioned earlier. That risk process alone is just another example. If we broke down those walls, those barriers, and involve people across the organization, having multiple stakeholders, and get them in part of that routine process and understanding risk, and then people start flagging things. Hey, I was working with this team and they're doing this wrong.
Yeah.
We have a risk over there, and it's been incredible.
Well, and it's not until they start understanding what things should be that they start flagging those concerns to you anyway. And I think that just goes to that's it's one of those signs that you built a robust security aware culture. So yeah, this has been very great. I appreciate it. It is Security Awareness Month. So, one of the things I'm asking everybody is, do you have any advice for the end user? Not for the CISO out there listening, but just for the end user, non technical.
Yeah, I think that if people are, participating in their program and they say, "I hate this," or "This training is stupid," tell somebody. Because really, at the end of the day, you don't know what you don't know, and it's just like we don't know the risks until we know the risks, right? Until they've been realized or something happens to call it out. So if there's problems in your organization and you feel that the training is providing no value, unless you work for the government, then you're out of luck pretty much. But if you work for any other organization, private organization, call it out and say, "Hey, I understand we're doing this training; it's a requirement, but it's not valuable. I'm not getting any value from it." And enough people do that, it will provide context for the organization to maybe change their approach to things and do something that provides value.
I like it. I like it. All right. Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of Fishing for Answers.